The start of the 70s was an incredible time of powerful songwriting and self-expression. This was epitomised in the talents of a group of singer-songwriters all centred in the Laurel Canyon area of Los Angeles. In this particular moment and this particular place, these songwriters inspired each other to write deeply moving songs which have stood the test of time. One of the first of these songwriters to make their debut was James Taylor, an artist who had been singled out by the Beatles and Apple Records at the end of the 60s for his talents, but through a series of personal setbacks wasn't able to immediately live up to that promise. But in 1970, everything changed. Now settled in California, Taylor released his second album, Sweet Baby James, which included a landmark single which would catapult his career and kick off a series of legendary singer-songwriter albums, transforming the industry to recognise the incredible power of honest and introspective songwriting. That song was Fire and Rain.
Been walking my mind to an easy time, my back turned towards the sun.
Hello there, it's Warren Huart here. I hope you're doing marvellously well. Welcome back to another episode of the series. If you haven't already, please subscribe, and if you hit the notification bell, you'll be notified when we have a new video. And if you're into production, you can go to producelikeapro.com and sign up for the email list and get a whole bunch of free goodies. James Taylor was born in Boston in 1948 and was raised in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. His family home was in a more sparsely populated region near the university, with lots of open spaces and natural beauty. Taylor later recalled, "Chapel Hill, the Piedmont, the outlying hills, were tranquil, rural, beautiful but quiet. Thinking of the red soil caused by local copper mining, plus the seasons, the way things smelled down there, I feel as though my experience of coming of age there was more a matter of landscape and climate than people." The tranquility of this setting is reflected in much of Taylor's songwriting, which showcases an incredible ability to set the scene with his harmonic content, melodies and lyric writing, in spite of fairly tumultuous experiences in his young adult life. While Taylor's childhood was largely one of peace and comfort, the end of the 60s brought many trials for James Taylor. While he had the good fortune and talent to be picked up by the Beatles for their new record label Apple, he was trying to break a heroin habit he had developed while gigging and looking for his big break in New York in 1966. As Taylor told the New York Times in 1981, "I learned a lot about music and too much about drugs." Although the release of his eponymous first album brought him favourable critical reviews, notably John Landau called it the coolest breath of fresh air I've inhaled in a good long while, Taylor's struggles with addiction rendered him unable to promote the album. Instead, he spent its release recovering in an addiction centre in Massachusetts. Later in 1969, Taylor broke both hands and both feet in a motorcycle accident, forcing him to take even more time away from performing. Despite all of this turmoil, Taylor was able to sign a new record deal with Warner Brothers in October of 1969. Like many of his generation, Taylor moved to California to restart his career. His second album, Sweet Baby James, was recorded at Sunset Sound in December of 1969. The first single from Taylor's second album was its title track, Sweet Baby James, a folk lullaby equating the lonely life of a touring musician to that of a cowboy on an open road. Although it remains one of the most well-known pieces today, it was not an immediate hit and did not chart. However, it was the album's second single which launched Taylor's career and realised the potential that so many of his early supporters saw in his music and songwriting. That song was Fire and Rain.
The first time I ever recognized this song as being something special was when I was 14 years old. I had heard the song previously, but it wasn't until this moment that I recognized its uniqueness. I was at a guitar camp, 14 years old, Park City, Utah. Shout out to London School of Guitar. We were there one evening having a discussion, talking about James Taylor and about his unique picking style and his songwriting. And we listened to Fire and Rain, and I think we listened to a couple others, Sweet Baby James. Yeah, I remember being taken back after really listening to it, because at the time, I sort of thought there was only two ways of playing. It was either strumming or playing lead. And to be able to combine, to be able to play in a rhythmic way but have so much melody infused into it is really exciting. And it's something that, to be truthful about, I actually, I don't do enough of. And I think because it is challenging, you're not only are you singing, but now you're also integrating a melody into your playing. So it's not necessarily the easiest thing in the world, but I think it adds a lot. There's a lot of hammer-ons in this song and a lot of pull-offs, which is a really fun and easy way to add melody into your guitar playing, which I feel I've probably used in every song since learning this song. All right, so the intro goes a little something like this. Go easy on me. One other thing about this song is all the hammer-ons and pull-offs. A lot of the melody is integrated in that technique. And one of the things that I remember about playing this the very first time was that I could utilize that in my songwriting. And so I'm pretty sure every song since I have played pull-offs and hammer-ons. So it's an easy little trick to add in some melody there. So yeah, really special song and really happy to be playing it. Yeah. Okay. I was telling Eric earlier that this song is really great for when you're feeling a little down, and it just feels, the song helps you feel understood. And that's something that I love about this song. And whenever I revisit it, I'm reminded of that feeling.
The opening of Fire and Rain is poignant and painfully truthful. The song was penned in part after Taylor learned of a tragic death of a close friend from his time in New York, Susie Schnurr. The event had occurred while Taylor was away in London recording for Apple Records, but his friends hadn't told him the news until several months later. Taylor explained that he began the song while he was in London after learning the news. My friend Suzanne had committed suicide a couple of months before my friends let me know. They didn't know how the news would hit me and kept it from me until we were well into mixing that album. Then they told me about it. That's why the song starts with the first verse. I started it in London. And certainly the connection to his real life experience comes out quite clearly in the opening lyrics. Just yesterday morning, they let me know you were gone, Suzanne. The plans they made put an end to you. I walked out this morning and I wrote down this song. I can't remember who to send it to. The opening verse is accompanied only by Taylor's own signature guitar playing, alongside his close friend Carole King on piano. The effect of such a deeply personal lyric with such an intimate musical setting truly brings out the heartbreaking honesty in his words. The chorus brings in the whole band and lays out a litany of tiny truths as he grappled with the reality of the hardest one, moving through life without ever seeing his friend again. I've seen fire and I've seen rain. I've seen sunny days that I never thought would end. I've seen lonely times when I could not find a friend, but I always thought I'd see you again. While the first verse and the chorus reference the loss of his friend, the other pieces of the song were written later, when he got back in the US and in a treatment centre, attempting to recover from his recurrent struggles with addiction. The vulnerability of the lyrics in the second verse built upon the tone set in the first verse, but this time with an internal reflection on his own struggles with depression. Taylor explained that the second verse was about coming back to the United States, sick and strung out, physically exhausted, undernourished and addicted. The short instrumental interlude, especially in the drums, leading into the second verse, builds a sense of urgency that matches the pleading tension of the verse. Won't you look down upon me, Jesus? You've got to help me make a stand. You've just got to see me through another day. My body's aching and my time is at hand. I won't make it in any other way. The third verse is introspective and self-reflective. really looking back into the journey that has brought him to this moment. He has stated in several interviews a connection to his experiences at Austin Riggs Mental Hospital in Stockbridge and a conscious effort to face the future despite the broken dreams and the heartbreak along the way. Been walking my mind to an easy time, my back turned towards the sun. Lord knows, when the cold wind blows, it'll turn your head around. Well, there's hours of time on the telephone line to talk about things to come. Sweet dreams and flying machines in pieces on the ground. The last line, sweet dreams and flying machines in pieces on the ground, references his old band before he became a solo artist. In a 2007 interview with American Songwriter, Taylor explained that the third verse is hopeful. It is much more general, about remembering one's life, thinking back to my band, The Flying Machine, like a postcard from the loony bin before going back into the world and re-engaging. The structure of the song is very straightforward. 3 verses, alternating with a chorus each time. There's no bridge or break section. The simplicity of the song allows for Taylor's performance and the performance of his incredible musicians on the track to move the song along through their expression. We can hear it in Taylor's guitar playing and his singing, as well as through the perfectly placed drums by Russ Kunkel. Kunkel's use of brushes throughout the song are part of why it works so well. Bobby West plays a double bass on the track rather than an electric bass, and Carole King plays piano on the track. The song was cut live at Sunset Sound in Hollywood, my favourite studio, and the whole Sweet Baby Jane's album was produced by Peter Asher, who also produced Taylor's first album and would produce his second, Mudslide Slim, and The Blue Horizon soon after. Taylor reflected on an experience with American Songwriter. We recorded it at Sunset Sound. I was living at Peter's house on Olympic down in the flats. Carol came over and I played it for her then. I taught her the song on Peter Asher's piano. She has this energy about how she plays. She's a lively player. She and I share a common language. We are definitely on the same page musically. She is so good at getting the feel of what I was doing, we cut it live. I was in a booth, playing guitar and singing. Carol on piano, Russ Kunkel on drums, a remarkably versatile and powerful drummer. I hadn't heard anybody play like that. His tom fills played with brushes, but lively with passion. And Bobby West was on upright bass, just nailing down the bass part. He bowed the last verse, which built a lot of tension, that arco bass. Fire and Rain was released as a single in August of 1970, 6 months after the release of the Sweet Baby James album earlier that year. The song hit number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100, number 2 in Canada, finally bringing Taylor the popularity and success that his early supporters had envisioned from his talents. The song and the album kicked off a particularly powerful moment for the singer and singer-songwriters, especially those centered in the Laurel Canyon area of Los Angeles in the early 70s. This moment would include Taylor's next hit album, Mudslide Slim and The Blue Horizon, as well as the mega hit albums of Carole King's Tapestry and Joni Mitchell's Blue, all released in 1971. And all albums we've talked about. There'll be a link underneath for those other 2 albums as well. The song has had a lasting impact on music, including making the cut for several songs of the century, such as those compiled by the National Endowment of the Arts, as well as the Recording Industry Association of America. It is one of Taylor's most beloved songs and an incredible example of songwriting that balances lyrical and musical experience in a very powerful, honest, and introspective way.
The California music scene in the late 60s and early 70s was an amalgamation of influences. Some were homegrown, some transplanted. In addition to the city's native labels like Capitol, Warner Brothers, and A&M, Los Angeles became the West Coast hub for several major East Coast labels, which set up shop in the city by the end of the decade. Labels like Elektra, Motown, and Alden Music. The city also found itself in the midst of a massive influx of artists, many of whom flocked to the then rural hippie enclaves of Laurel Canyon, Silver Lake, and Topanga. In 2012, Joni Mitchell explained the atmosphere of Los Angeles in the late 60s, saying, "Like Paris was to the Impressionists and the Post-Impressionists, LA was the hotbed of all musical activity. The greatest musicians in the world either live here or pass through here regularly. I think that a lot of beautiful music came from it, and a lot of beautiful times came through that mutual understanding." We often talk about the Laurel Canyon scene because so many of them lived in that particular neighborhood, but the term often encompasses a much wider geographical space. Los Angeles was, even then, a sprawling urban space. But as James Taylor explained in 2007, Los Angeles feels like a big spread out place. But people put together a city, they assemble a city, and they connect the dots with their automobile. It felt small to me. It was a small, tight-knit community. And that tight-knit community was made of an eclectic scene of musicians, from Frank Zappa, The Doors, and Alice Cooper, to folk rock pioneers like the Byrds and Buffalo Springfield, and then, of course, the supergroup Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. And in this hotbed of musical activity, collaboration, and inspiration, solo singer-songwriters like James Taylor, Joni Mitchell, and Carole King charted a new way of writing music, which was personal and introspective, and even captured something of that live music experience within the recorded medium. Some of this can be attributed to the ways these musicians interacted with one another. James Taylor was a solo artist, but he was performing, recording, and generally spending time with the same groups of musicians who were also putting together some of the other biggest albums of this time. In fact, after Taylor finished Sweet Baby James, he went on very quickly to record Mudslide Slim and the Blue Horizon, with many of the same musicians who were working on Carole King's Tapestry and Joni Mitchell's Blue. When speaking of those three albums, these artists often talk about how it felt like they were working on one big album together. But of course, they weren't one big album. Part of the magic of the solo singer-songwriters is that personal connection we feel with the artists. It's a very intimate way of hearing and experiencing music. When we hear James Taylor sing, "I walked out this morning and I wrote down this song, I just can't remember who to send it to." We don't hear a rock star singing to a stadium of thousands of listeners. We hear a human who is singing to his closest friends, or even just to himself. In 1972, rock journalist Joel Vance wrote in the New York Times the importance of the personal connection with singer-songwriters. He wrote, "James Taylor singing Fire and Rain, Joni Mitchell singing Both Sides Now, or Cat Stevens singing Morning Has Broken produce the same effect on the audience. The singer is singing to me in a personal way. The singer knows my life and I know his. The singer knows the times I live in. I want to hug him or her till he or she squeaks." And so it becomes very important that the singer-songwriter albums, like Sweet Baby James, capture the intimacy of the small personal performance spaces in which they were forged. Not the least of these being the Troubadour on Santa Monica Boulevard in Los Angeles. In an interview with musicologist Krista Ann Bentley, James Taylor's sister Kate Taylor encapsulated the feeling the Troubadour brought these musicians. It was this very intimate and comfortable place where you could see a lot of the same folks there every night, a lot of friends. It always seemed like it was crowded, and everyone always seemed excited. We were all very sociable and excitable, and we would talk about gigs, songs, records, and the news of the day. In recording Sweet Baby James, Taylor moved away from the more orchestrated arrangements of his debut album. Prior to recording Sweet Baby James, Taylor told Rolling Stone magazine in 1969, "There's a larger and larger translation process that takes place between my making music and it coming out on record. I hope my next album will be simpler. It has to be, because the music is simple, and a big production job just buries all my intentions." Producer Peter Asher, likewise, had come to the same conclusion as they left Apple to come west to California. "I started to think that I overdid that process ever so slightly, and realized that I just needed to pay even more attention to James and his writing and his singing and his playing, and be a bit less of an avid producer. Sometimes wanting to make your mark as a producer, wanting to make the record neat, can detract from the songs." And we see this effect on Fire and Rain, a simply written song in which the arrangement brings out the intimacy of the words. In the three verses and choruses of the song, most of the emotional pull comes from the way Taylor sings, or very subtle instrumental choices. There's a slight and limited build in the drums as they enter before the second verse, and again at the end of the last chorus. In that last chorus, Taylor elongates the final, "But I always thought that I'd see you again," to say, "But I always thought that I'd see you, baby, one more time again." Before the drums seem to build, but then instead of building into a bridge or new material, the song meanders into a coda section of repeated improvisatory lines, and ultimately fades to end the song. The songwriting and the production perfectly balance each other to bring out that intimacy which we associate with singer-songwriters. And finally, it is striking that this new mode of writing songs and producing albums came at this particular moment in this particular place, by a generation of songwriters who had experienced the accelerating intensity of the late 60s. They were there as the Beatles and the Beach Boys experimented in the studio, and they had certainly seen the effects of the psychedelic movement at the end of the decade. Truly, the 60s had brought so much social, cultural, and technological change, much of which was, at first, filled with unbridled idealism and hope for what that change could bring. But at the start of the 70s, much of that idealism had faded. The assassinations of President Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King Jr. at the end of the decade took a toll on this generation's optimism, and the escalation of the military involvement in the Vietnam War affected so many young people. The singer-songwriter movement was a way for this generation to look inward and find meaning through their own personal experiences and to share and connect with one another with those shared emotions.
My personal connection to this is, first of all, the song. The album was absolutely beautiful. And those three albums we're talking about, Tapestry, Blue, and Sweet Baby James, were all made within, I don't know, a mile of each other, of studios. They could all walk to each other's studios. Anyway, all three of those albums, like I said, were made by three of the greatest singer-songwriters of that period. Joni Mitchell is a personal favourite of mine. I believe one of the greatest lyricists ever to live. Carol is all of those things. Melody writer extraordinaire, as well as being an incredible lyricist herself. And there you have James Taylor. Introspective is probably an understatement. The way that he delivers makes you want to listen to the lyrics. He has a way of just presenting them like this to you. So like, here's the words, listen to these words. There's no, 3-octave range. There's no grit and rah, rah, and you get lost in vocal techniques and pyrotechnics. It is all about melody, the way he delivers those lyrics, and above all, the lyrics. They are unbelievable. The other thing is, I was very fortunate when I was working with the Fray a million years ago, I think about 10 years ago, they were on a Buddy Holly compilation, and that Buddy Holly compilation was produced by Peter Asher. So I got to spend a few days, about 4 or 5 days, with Peter Asher, tracking the song, also traveling to and from LA and Denver together. And he told me a lot of stories. And James Taylor, for him, was one of the most important parts of his career. He was at Apple Records. As you probably know, his sister was, or is, Jane Asher. And Jane at the time was Paul's girlfriend. He was also in a band called Peter and Gordon, who were massively successful, had a bunch of top 10 singles, I think actually some number ones around the world. He became, I believe, the head of A&R for Apple Records. So he signed James Taylor. When the album didn't quite break the way everybody wanted, he went with James to LA. So it wasn't just James moving to Los Angeles from London. It was James and Peter Asher relocating to Los Angeles. And Peter, he told me he believed in James Taylor so much. So there's so much to this that I love. The fact that you've got a producer and manager of the time, Peter Asher, completely and utterly believing in this massive talent, James Taylor, who had had all kinds of crazy things happening. Breaking your legs, your feet and your hands, and still playing music, being addicted to drugs, heroin of all drugs, being in rehab and really having not a penny to rub together. A lot of people, most people would just have given up, but he didn't. He obviously had a great support network, and probably quite frankly because he was so unbelievably talented. When you're surrounding yourself with Joni Mitchell and Carole King, there's obviously some talent there. So the album is beautiful. If you don't know Sweet Baby James, buy it, download it, stream it, whatever. But Fire and Rain really is one of the most important songs of that period, and frankly one of the most important songs of all time. And this is coming from a guy who kind of loves edgy music. If I like jazz, I like it to be a little wrong. If I like blues in particular, a little rough, a little wrong. So you'd think, James Taylor, you know, so smooth and... No. The lyrics, the lyrics, the lyrics. Don't be fooled by a beautiful delivery. Just listen to those lyrics. And the way that James Taylor delivers, it's very hard not to hear the lyrics. There's nothing disguising them. My hairs are standing on end. He's an incredible lyricist. Okay, thanks ever so much for watching. Check out Fire and Rain. Check out Sweet Baby James. If you've got any other ideas for songs, for artists, for albums, whatever it might be, please leave them down below. Record labels. Thanks everybody. Genres. Thanks everybody for watching. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir. Happy New Year! Happy New Year. It's going to be a great one. What a wonderful way to start with some James Taylor.